The stream live.
All right. Welcome. Hello, and I hope we have a bunch of listeners and participants in this online seminar that is just about to start. My name is Miriam Parkman. I'm currently in Stockholm, Sweden, and I would like to say a warm welcome to Lee Wishner, who is a fashion historian and Dorothy Liebes expert of today. And also welcome to Lisa Harbottle, a fashion designer and founder of the brand Revel. And then welcome to Jessica Parker as well, who's also a fashion historian and our environmental expert. And yeah, my name is Miriam Parkman. As I said, I'm a weaver and artist, and I am so excited to do this today with all of you. And before we continue, I'm just going to switch to Swedish and welcome any Swedish listener who would like to have this introduction in Swedish. So I'll be back in English in just a second. Välkomna alla som nu tittar och är i Sverige eller pratar svenska. Det här är så roligt. Det ska bli så himla intressant att få göra det här samtalet. Och jag har precis välkomnat våra deltagare. Jag kommer göra det en gång till då på svenska. Så vi har alltså Lisa Harbottle som är designer och grundare av ett märke som heter Revel. Och så har vi Jessica Parker och Lee Wishner som är modehistoriker och kommer prata om Dorothy Liebes och Clark Gable. Och jag är alltså textilkonstnär och vävare. Jag träffade Ebba under min studietid och där föddes också mitt intresse för hennes värv och hennes historia. Och det liksom gick ihop så mycket med mitt eget intresse för både textil och vävning men också mode från då just 50- och 60-talen. Och vi kommer prata om det här, just mode och design utifrån det som Ebba von Eckermann upptäckte när hon reste till USA och vad hon kanske tog med sig därifrån. Och det var just under 50- och 60-talen och det var även då en tid i USA då väldigt mycket hände. Och i slutet av seminariet så kommer det finnas tid för att svara på frågor och de kan ni skriva då i de här kommentarerna som finns på sidan. Så kommer vi ta upp dem i slutet och då kommer jag också försöka göra en sammanfattning på svenska om det önskas. Men ja, då kommer jag byta till engelska igen. All right, I'm back in English. To start off, I would like to give a short background on why I wanted to have this conversation. And I first met Ebba von Eckermann as a student when I went to my textile school. And I felt like head over heels to her story of being in the US in the 50s and 60s, being a female designer and even a weaver. It all kind of blended together into being everything I liked. Like she was a living person who did all of these things that I could only dream about. And she was still alive. So I had the pleasure of meeting her a few times. And what really pulled me in was that she did all of those travels to the US. The first one was in 1950. And then she continued to travel there for, I think, almost 3 decades. In the 50s and 60s, she went there every fall and every spring for 2 months and just traveled around the department stores, visiting her clients. So, I mean, she really spent a considerable amount of time in the US. And I'm going to show a quick picture here for people who might not know Ebba. Her business started at home in Ripsa, which is a small... let's see if I can get this picture up. Yeah, there we go. So this is how her business started in the cottages of the small village of Ripsa in Sörmlands, just a 1 hour car drive from Stockholm. And people in the village started weaving for her. And she started by making simple blankets that moved on to garments. And eventually then in 1950, she went to the US and she started to sell her products there. And I'm trying to get another picture here. It's not really working. Maybe we can get it here. Well, no, that might come later. But as a vintage-loving textile artist that I am, some of my other favorites and big inspirations, except for Ebba, are the textile artist Dorothy Liebes and the designer Clark Gable. And I would like to start by asking you, Lee, if you would like to give us a short bio of who Dorothy Liebes was.
Oh, sure. It's a very short bio because her bio is so long, and we just published a book on her a couple of years ago, but we could already do another book. She was born in Santa Rosa, California, so she's a native Californian. She was born in 1897, so a bit earlier than Ebba.
Yes, about 20 years.
Which is interesting. So she studied applied arts at Berkeley, Cal State Berkeley, and I'm sorry, UC Berkeley, excuse me, Cal people. And then she studied weaving also at Hull House in Chicago. And finally, her last educational degree was in art education at Teachers College in Columbia, at Columbia University in New York City. But she never stopped learning about textiles throughout her travels around the world. She studied with museums. She studied with weavers. She was a consultant to countries trying to develop industry. She opened her studio in San Francisco in 1930, right after she had actually studied in Paris with the Rodier firm. So she got her chops in some big places. But then she started quickly following her own artistic impulses because she was really an artist. But she was somebody who thought on a very like macro scale, where she wanted to bring her look, the Liebes look, which she became very famous for, which was a use of color and texture and glitter that kind of always was constant through her life. But she really wanted to advise corporations as well on palettes, color palettes, product development, how to use color effectively, how to develop the hand loomed look for mass production. So that's a very different aspect of Dorothy Liebes's career than Ebba's career. From what I understand about Ebba, there wasn't ever this effort to scale up production or make it more economical. But that was something that Liebes was very, very concerned with her entire life. So. Yeah, and other than that, I mean, she just is this sort of invisible force in all aspects of American living at that point, not just in fashion, which she was very, very involved with, but in interior design, in colors for, basically the look of the mid-century. There's a few colorists that were really, really key in steering the ship to what we all agree looks like the mid-century palette. She was one of the most important people steering that ship. And she moved her studio from San Francisco to New York in the 50s and ended her career there. But she, up until the last moments of her life, she was still working with industry. And in fact, one of her last projects was working with Sears on a line of home textiles. And she was as excited about that as she was about any custom commission that she ever received. So she is a dynamo, and that's why they call her Dynamo Dot.
Yeah, that's a great name. I think what Ebba did was in some ways a large, like big production. She did scale up a lot, like from that beginning in the cottage industry. She started her own little factory, but still like on her own homestead and her farm. There were a lot of weavers at work at some point, but definitely not like a mass production in that sense. I think it was also like in the 70s, the economical situation was not sustainable anymore.
Right.
It didn't work all by hand in that sense. But it's so fascinating with Dorothy Liebes. I think when I first heard about her, I was also really intrigued by the way that she wanted the hand-loomed look, but in a mass production way, and that she also wanted it to be so accessible and affordable.
I don't know if that's a uniquely American trait. I do believe at this point the good design movement was kind of an international thing. But
Yes.
in terms of democratizing design, I don't think anybody did it with as much fervor as the Americans, and that there was always like a real emphasis on trying to get better and better for less and less. And that's what she was very, very devoted to.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a moment of that in Sweden as well in the 50s, when you had like really good designers working on like really good housing for everyone. And that's what we called folkhemmet in Swedish today, the people's home. That kind of, you know, it had its era, sadly. But I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that. I definitely think that could be one thing that Ebba discovered on her travels to the US. And
absolutely.
But she did also like incorporate to her skirts that she started making. She started adding like affordable plain colored blouses in cotton, or jersey tops that you can match the skirt with. And as far as I've read, they were quite affordable, so that you could like add into your closet with your already purchased Ripsa garment.
Right. Yeah. And that's the kind of modular thinking that Libes and her circle of fashion friends, which was considerable, they all understood the needs of a modern woman. They were Libes was thinking specifically more in terms of the American woman, because that's what she was. But yeah, that's the ethos. So
yeah. And speaking of the modern woman, Jessica, would you like to take that further and tell us a little more about Claire McCardell?
Yeah, absolutely. And so many things that you were talking about, Lee, just now, like really, you know, ring true for McCardell as well. She introduced a capsule wardrobe of travel separates in the 1930s, and kind of nobody knew what to do with them. I think it was like 1934, and the buyers were just like, I don't know what to do with this. And of course, they found their footing years later in the early 1940s. But Claire was born in 1905 in Frederick, Maryland. She had 3 brothers, and she, I think, you know, looked at their kind of pants and their sturdy clothes with pockets, and you know, she said it's hard to climb a tree in a dress, and so she would like braid her hair and keep it in a tight bun so she could kind of play in the neighborhood. And she had a really early interest in designing and creating clothing. She studied, her family had a, not like a, it wasn't like a couture situation, but they had a dressmaker who they, you know, employed twice a year to make clothes for the whole family. And Claire would watch her and figure out, you know, like, how is she doing this? How is she creating these things? And it really sparked a very early interest in practical clothing design for her. So, you know, as she got older, she really, she studied at what's now Parsons, the New School for Design. And so she studied art history and figure drawing and sketching. And, you know, at that point, Paris was sort of like the only place where fashion came from. And so she traveled to Paris. She studied in Paris for quite a while, as like through Parsons, and, you know, took apart all these incredible couture gowns that were sort of cast-offs from the wealthy ladies, who was like, okay, well, that season's over. And so she and her close friends, Mildred Orrick and Josette Walker, kind of like had, especially her and Mildred were studying together, and they would like take apart these amazing dresses and try to understand, like, you know, the bias cuts. She was a big fan of Vionnet, and how those bias cuts like conform to the body instead of, you know, caging it into something like was the fashion before. So when she came back to America, she was kind of determined to forge her own path and design what she felt American women specifically needed. And so, you know, after a couple false starts with some other businesses, she kind of fell into this sort of role at Townley, where she would eventually kind of spend the rest of her career. She fell into this role at Townley in the 1930s when she was design assistant to a designer named Robert Turk, and he died in an accident. He was only a couple years older than her. And so in her 20s, she's suddenly like, head designer for this firm. And she really wanted to solve a lot of problems that she felt women faced, like they don't have any pockets in women's wear. Back closures with lots of buttons are really fussy and you need help to get dressed. And so she struggled to convince her boss and store buyers that she could design something that women would actually want and need.
Yeah.
And so she came up with her first kind of big hit was what was called the monastic dress in 1938. She basically took an Algerian design that she had seen on her travels, which was like a big sort of tent dress that was, fitted at the shoulders, but kind of draped outward, that you could sort of belt. The wearer could belt to their, however they wanted to belt it. And Best & Company bought it and called it the Nada frock. She was not credited anywhere in the sort of, design of it and in the sort of marketing of it. And eventually Townley then went out of business because her boss was trying to fight the copies. So it broke him financially. But after a couple of years, they regrouped. And when she came back to Townley, there was some new management. And she basically said, I will come back to you and be your designer if I get my name on the label. You accept all designs without any changes. If you don't like something, then it doesn't get altered. No surprises and pockets and everything. And so it was really sort of like this turning point. I think she had some leverage at that point in the early 1940s because Paris was occupied. Dorothy Shaver at Lord & Taylor was really promoting American designers. And so, with Marjorie Griswold and some of the other like women on 7th Avenue, it was really becoming like okay, well, we're not getting our inspiration from Paris anymore. How can we popularize American designers and really showcase their work in a way that is uniquely American? And so they created this sort of like, they highlighted a bunch of American designers, and Claire was like at the forefront of that. And so she really exemplified, she hired her own publicist to kind of like help create her brand. She established her own separate from Townley, so she could make accessories and gloves and sunglasses and things like that that would be separate from Townley. And she was such a good businesswoman, but it never distracted from her innovation, from her building personal relationships. She really had some important personal relationships with textile designers, and she loved that creative collaboration with them in terms of like selecting the colors and the patterns and the fabrics. One of the things that she did was popularize denim. Oh yeah, fashion fabric. She, at the start of the war, people were, getting married in the off season in winter in cold churches, and so one of the first things that she created once she had, the ability to do so at Townley, she created wool wedding gowns. So and with pockets, right? So like really long, and so they would be, long dresses with these basque waists, which signified kind of, you can't really see that, a more formal, design, but they had these huge sweeping skirts. Oh wow, yeah. And then after the wedding, you could dye them. So that's what this person did. You can see the label is dyed. Oh yeah. So after the wedding, if you didn't want a big white dress, now you have a dark blue evening gown.
Yes.
So yeah, she really was known at the time for her incredible fashion innovations. You know, creating your own waistline was a big thing for her as well. Being able to, she had all these like ties and strings and the closures, those like brass closures. She called them her McCardleisms.
Oh.
And, you know, even during her lifetime, she was just so revered. In 1953, a museum in Beverly Hills sponsored a retrospective of her work at the height of her career. It wasn't even like a, you know, like a, oh, she's retiring, or like, oh, you know, it was like she was that important.
Yeah.
And
really cool.
And I mean, who knows what she could have. She unfortunately died of colon cancer in 1958, and so she felt like she was just getting started. She was really
mid-50s then, right?
I'm sorry?
She was around her mid-50s when she died,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. It would have been,
But she made a huge impression still.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise you, I don't think, to know that Libas and McCardle were friends.
Absolutely.
And they were in the same circles, and I have a photo to show later that will link them together, but yeah.
Great. Yeah.
It's so fascinating too when you talk about these two women who were like a bit older than Ebba. So I'm not sure if I mentioned, but Ebba was born in 1921. So she was a few years younger than them. And she was the daughter of a very famous designer or couture lady here in Sweden named Märta Skolan was the name of the atelier. Her mother's name was Margareta. And so Ebba was also brought up so much with this like super high fashion sense, and she went to Paris as a 17-year-old to see the fashion shows before the war, and she really had that like laid out for her, but she really didn't want it. She was not interested either. So she wanted to become a farmer, and that's how she eventually found weaving, because she went to this farming school where weaving was included. So she started doing weaving, and during the war she started making yardage for her mother's school, and eventually that led to her brand, where she could also do like her thing and find her way of doing this. And she was also, of course, very like strong-headed, I guess, to pull this through and to not do what was set out for her to do. And speaking of that, Lisa, would you like to tell us a bit of your experience and maybe your bio on finding design and fashion? And also, to me, like when I first found your brand, I was just so amazed and so intrigued right away by like the timeless feel of your designs, and how to me at least, I instantly saw the influences from this era and maybe also these designers. Would you like to tell us a bit more about yourself and that?
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, I always have said that McCardle is my spirit animal as far as design goes. I mean, if I were to be reincarnated from anybody, I was always hoping that it would be her. But the thing about these eras that they were designing in, you know, these you have different kinds of designers, different kinds of clothing that they would make. And what I love the most about the eras that these women were designing in is that it was really the emergence of truly functional design by women for women. You know, if you look back at the things that people know from either old Hollywood or Dior or Chanel, you know, these are designs that are for a functional, you know, for a specific type of lifestyle. You know, Dior designed for women who live, they're not carrying bags of groceries into their house. Somebody is doing that for them. So they can wear these caged, you know, bodices and these big full crinoline skirts, you know, the look. They can wear this, you know, very tightly buttoned up Chanel suit. But you know, with Libas and McCardle, you have women who are really thinking about functional design for a daily lifestyle For a woman who kind of has to do all kinds of things, you're not going to see somebody out in the garden in a beautiful, chiffon, silk chiffon blouse. You want to see somebody who's wearing, you want to be wearing denim or cotton or things that do not snag. And none of these functional designs would have ever become anything if it wasn't for the fabrics that they're working with. I'm from the camp that really believes the fabric tells you what it wants to become for the body. It's very much, and a lot of the designs that Ebba made, if you look at her what's the name of her famous jacket?
Marg.
Thank you. That would not have its shape and structure if it wasn't for the thickness of that wool and the way, the striking stripes that she has on it, the way that it's cut is very specific to how, she wanted that to drape on the body. It wouldn't do that if that fabric wasn't already, the way. It wouldn't do that at all if that fabric didn't have that natural structure to it. And a lot of what made her designs so amazing is because of how those fabrics are created. And you're not a designer if you aren't working with amazing fabrics. So for people to have found her and to have found these amazing weavings with these colors and the textures and the structure, that's kind of like finding a gold mine for a designer. These are things that I look for all the time and have very secret mills stashed away around the world that, hopefully I can get little cuts of fabrics from. So I feel like in a very similar sense, if I were living back then, she is somebody I would have totally swooped on to be able to use. But what's really fun about incredible fabric is that it does allow you to have a timeless design, like a design that's not too much of anything, because you kind of want to let the fabric speak for itself when it's draped on the body, is how I feel about design. And I feel like that is something that all three of these designers, weavers, designers, I think that that's something that they really incorporated into what they made. And that's kind of my same ethos as well. So
I love what you said there about fabric being like telling you what it wants to become.
Always. I mean, you have, there's like, whenever I'm designing, there's, a list of things that I want to do based off of fabrics I know work in them. And then the other half is, I don't know what I'm going to make until I find the fabric. And so it's kind of like, you look at a piece of fabric, you touch it, you see the drape, and it's meant to become something like this. And so you can't, tell a full skirt to be a full skirt if the fabric's not going to hold that structure for you, There's, to be able to take even, the fabrics that McCardle used to work with, to be able to take, even her monastic dress, like that dress ended up becoming what it was once you belted it because of the structure of that fabric and the volume of that fabric, that, the amount of fabric that's in that dress. If it was just a slim cut, column like dress, it wouldn't have the same oomph that it does. Right. So I don't know. Well, it's like a slab of marble and carving out the sculpture from it, but it's the same for fabric and design on the body.
Yeah. I think that's
also oh, sorry.
I think that's also why I eventually found both Ebba and Dorothy and Claire, that as a weaver myself, all of these three women really do both of these things. They have a fabric, or they have an idea of a yardage or a pattern, and or maybe even a yarn and the feeling of that yarn, and then they just let that shine. So it's so clear that even if it's like a big 50s full skirt or a dress or something, is just like the garment is just like a holder of the fabric or the colors. To me, it's very important, and I just feel like they I feel really inspired now to think like that more with my textiles too.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that, I mean, I am not a weaver or a textile designer. I tried to study that in school, but it is just not I don't have the patience for it like you do. I much rather take what you make and turn it to you. Exactly. It is definitely I mean, you know, you put your love into making the fabric, and then you have to let it go into the world to somebody like me who's going to turn it into something else. And so I think that collaboration is just really incredible. And that has been happening, you know, to even watch it almost 100 years now, you know, 80 years ago now. That collaboration between craftspeople is really inspiring. So
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and it was wonderful. Oh, sorry.
No. Anyone go.
It was wonderful at the time that there were so many American textile mills that were producing really high quality fabrics that McCardle was able to go to. I think that, you know, it just, and so many California designers as well. Like there are, you know, so many textile mills at the time were willing to collaborate with designers and produce something just for them. And yeah, Lisa, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you go find all these, you know, Italian fabrics and stuff. But like at the time it was a, you know, the industry in America was really booming through the 1950s, and then kind of all changed.
Globalization changed everything.
I mean, to be able to find anything good now, I have to scour the world.
And it's honestly for me to find good weaving yarn as well. You can find tons and tons of knitting yarn, but to find like hard spun yarn that I would like is like a hunt every time.
Yeah, every time.
Yeah. But it's also, I think it's so cool with Dorothy Liebes as well, that she also like kind of splashed her textiles like all over. She did for clothing and also for interior design, and also used so many other, like, speaking of materials, she also used a lot of unconventional materials.
Oh my gosh, yes. There was a quote that basically a friend of hers said that if you stood too close to her loom, she might try to weave you into it. That was how adventurous she was with her materials and her spirit. She just, even though she studied formally and she trained that way, she knew that she could push the limits with materials the most. She actually really philosophically felt that the simplest weaves were the best for her. And actually for most weavers, because if you stick with the structure as simple as a plain weave or twill, it's really your color choices and your material choices that make it exciting. And so she proved that time and time again with different kinds of stripes and plaids and, you know, color blocked fabrics. She would take strips of beads and put them through as a weft. She would use ribbons, rickrack, pom-poms. There was even a weaving in the Persian room where she wove in strings of Christmas lights. Yeah, and they would put them on, and so there would be like shimmering lurex and twinkling lights, and so she was fearless, and that paid off for her as well, because that's one of the things that got her early attention. But it was in my favorite thing that actually I think connects Liebes and Ebba the most is this love of lurex, and I have a few little things that I've collected over the years. This is a silver lurex, and this is a product that was made by the Joe Beckman Company in Cleveland, and it's actually another wartime product. It debuted in '46, and when it came out, it was only in a few colors. But by the end of by the end of the '50s, there was every color imaginable of lurex. And this became very popular as well. Black lurex didn't have to be shiny in a colorful way, but so there's a lot of different space dyed lurex. Hold on one second. Here's a multicolored Lorex that I know I've seen in Ebba's work.
Yeah, I mean, it's noted in her diary that she did. We know that she found Lorex in the U.S. and that she got to bring them home, and that she saw clothing that were in, as you said, wonderful Californian colors.
Yeah. So this Lorex product was such a so Doe Beckman hired her to promote it, devise color palettes for it, and also figure out what effects could be achieved in weaves. So she was basically like their glimmer proselytizer, I call her. She was on world tours everywhere in Japan to promote different colors and products with Lorex. It's just another one of those wartime happy accidents. You know, she would also use cellophane and other things, but once World War II broke out, those supplies became very challenging. So this material came along just at the right moment. Also in the post-war period, when people were really turning to the luxurious look, and, you know, shimmering gold and silver was really very popular for everything, not just evening wear. And that was another goal of hers, was to make shine a year-round thing, and also not just relegated to ballrooms and candlelight dinners and things like that, but you should be able to wear a cloth of gold swimsuit to the beach. So that was part of the early marketing, was all of the miraculous things you could do with Lorex. And I'm just going to show a couple of pictures if I can. Am I sharing? There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so this is just a quick little stroll down the Dorothy Wright Liebes rabbit hole, but I took some images of Liebes's works, which are the larger images here, and comparing them in sort of kind of a rudimentary way to some of Ebba's work as well, so that you can actually see that. And you can confirm this for me, Miriam, but with weaving, because of the warp and the weft, you are fairly limited with the things you can accomplish with that gridded structure. From a stylistic point of view, you'll see that there's a lot of overlap, because a plaid is a series of interlocking stripes. I mean, it's just, that's the way it is. But, you know, with Ebba, I feel like her work perhaps was a little bit more inspired by traditions that were local to her. Like Liebes was more influenced by Bauhaus design, perhaps, rather than folk design. But you can also see how those are very, very similar as well.
Totally.
And now here's just a couple of Lorex ads. You can see what the promotion was like, the colors were like. The bathing suit is a Rosemary Reed swimsuit. The dress is a Claire McCardle. And so this was one of the ways that they overlapped in the promotion. Claire McCardle was actually very involved with the promotion of Lorex. And there was a kind of a hilarious line drawing campaign that they did as well around this time to introduce and it was Liebes wrote to Women's Wear Daily to tell them, like, I really don't think that this drawing looks anything like Claire McCardle. But so she was involved with sort of like how practical it was, how you could add a little bit of glimmer, but not a lot of ornament. And that was another big thing for McCardle. Adding just enough detail and interest, but not being overly fussy and decorated.
Yeah, that's right. Everything needed to have a purpose. It was really
Yeah. So and then I'll just show you another. This is actually a great example of sort of the similar styles that you can get with stripes, but how different that they can be with what you do with them. And then this is the honeysuckle example. it's very hard. There's very thin little lurex threads running through it, but I just love this profusion of different colors of green and lurex that she put together on her weaving chart. And comparing that with another piece of Libes's that was probably used for curtains or upholstery. But another fun thing about Libes is that she never really saw a division between what a textile for a couch could do versus a textile for your body. She thought that there's always room for adaptation.
Oh, I use curtain fabric all the time.
See?
All the time. There are so many linens that are curtain fabrics, and I'm like, but it's linen.
Yeah,
exactly. It works just fine.
Exactly.
I think with Ebba's work, I think that she definitely came from a very traditional background. She had a pretty fancy upbringing, and then she lived in the country, so she also saw a lot of traditional textiles. We do have tons of that in Sweden. There are so many patterns that are like very known and widely used in traditional textiles, and there's like a strong heritage of keeping up with making those patterns. And I think that one of the things that first caught my eye with Ebba's work that I think like she really took those patterns and made them better for a garment and for the time, adding lyrics and adding more color and making them more exciting. But I also think that was possibly why she eventually started to feel less up to date and less modern when like the 70s came. Like I think that her work was best in the 50s and early 60s. Maybe that's, it's my favorite time. But when she started to do like the longer coats in the late 60s and early 70s, when she was also older herself, so it kind of, it follows her own lifeline that she would start making a little more ladylike styling as she also grew older. But I think at that point, it started to shift into something that would feel, homemade in a sense that wasn't popular anymore for the younger audience here. And it's like also maybe a feeling of like, it's not cool to have something that's home woven, even though it wasn't. It was still very bought. But I think it's really fascinating how it shifted from being so cool and like she was a pioneer in doing this and traveling to the US at department stores with a loom that traveled across like from San Francisco to New York to Los Angeles to Chicago, and everyone was like in full awe of the weaving countess sitting there just weaving and showing, and her sister came along to sew the garments to sew the skirts right there on stage. So from that, it was really cool and popular to like 10 to 20 years later, it was maybe not as cool anymore.
Yeah, and the other factor that is a big one at least in the American textile industry is that it's as you're moving through the 60s into the 70s, you're starting to the marketplace is starting to become dominated by knitwear. And knits are stretchy and they're comfortable, and they're also being made in all sorts of, miraculous new fibers and things like that. So that really kind of displaces a lot of interest in hand woven or even the woven look, I feel.
Well,
so that's another aspect of fashion that makes people fall in and out of favor as well,
Yeah, I was just going to say the shift to synthetics initially was really, in the 50s was really thought of as like so futuristic. It wasn't like, polyester was like a fabric of the future. It wasn't considered something that was like cheap or undesirable. One of the things that McCardle was a huge proponent of creating new textiles, especially I think from that mindset of the war fabric shortages of Japanese and French silks and French woolens. And so thinking about how can technology help us sort of create new fabrics. And so like this is a good example of this. This is a what they call dove suede. So it's like it has kind of a suede-y feel to it. But it was one of these fabrics that's like, would last forever. and be very, you know, warm and insulating. And so, yeah, I think there was such an emphasis on these fabrics as being modern. And yeah, actually, I'm going to let's see if I can pull up.
Well, also wool is just generally a harder fabric to care for.
Exactly.
You can't just throw it in the washing machine. You have to hand wash it and lay it flat, or you have to take it to the dry cleaners. And that, I think, just ended up becoming it still is a hassle for a lot of people.
That's right.
In 2025. So
yeah. These fabrics, this is the original ad from 1951 for this coat. And it had a matching sort of, you know, dress for it. Yeah. Rayon and nylon luxury knitted forever in a dress. Forever. I mean, these fabrics were really sort of like, yeah, for women, you know, because one of Claire's like central beliefs was that women should be able to go out into the world and do whatever they needed to do or wanted to do, give them more freedom. These fabrics symbolized giving women more freedom, and in terms of both care and wearability and longevity. She really felt like you should be able to buy a piece from her and wear it for decades. And she got so much communication from women who would write her letters and say things like, you know, I've had this dress for 20 years. Or, you know, one woman wrote and told her about an expedition to the jungle, like in Peru or something, and how this dress was with her. She wore it every single day and washed it in the river. Like it was just this, like, women really appreciated the practicality of it.
Yeah.
And they're also designing for it to last forever, so that it's a design in itself that should also last forever. It should be a timeless, not a trend. And I think that seems like something that all of these women were particularly interested in. It was good design, and when you build good design, it lasts forever, and it looks good forever.
Yeah, that's right. And that's certainly,
but it will always look good no matter what time period you come from, because it's just that distilled down to a good design. So that coat is as today as it was then.
Yeah. And that's something I notice. I wear Lisa's clothes pretty much every single day. So that's something I noticed with her work as well. Like I can wear something, I can look at a dress that I bought from her a few years ago and think like, this dress is going to be on, you know, in my closet forever. And it's going to be something that is going to look as good, you know, in 10 or 20 years, both style and quality wise, as it does now.
Well, there's something about how McCardell designed, how do I say this? I can think of how I want the design, and I can think of how I want you to wear it. But there's also, I think, a little bit of magic when you put thought into a design that lets the wearer change how they wear that design, whether you belt it this way, that way, tie it up here, let it drape there. There's a way to kind of, you know, let the person eat the cookie how they want to eat the cookie, you know? So I think that that's something that allows a piece to be timeless and move through decades, because everything when your lifestyle changes from year after year, your body also changes. So depending on, you know, where you're at in your life, I think it's really important to note that when you have a timeless design, it's because it can change with you, you know?
Totally.
So,
this is a great example of that. So this dress is cut on the bias. So it's very stretchy without there's no elastane in here. It has a hook at the neckline. So if I want a higher neck, I can do this. If I don't, you know, I don't have to do that. If I want, I can tie this spaghetti straps however I want to tie them. I can tie it high on the waistline. I can tie it looser or tighter. And of course, I have these wonderful, you know, pockets here. And it's just like, I can wear this dress now. I also could wear it 40 pounds ago. And so it's really these like timeless things that you know, are so rare today in the marketplace. So yeah. It's one thing I appreciate about Lisa's work as well.
Thank you.
Yes, I just realized that I have this book here in my studio that I got from my colleague who's an American but lives here. And it's a fabric sample book from 1956. And it has all those really nice little fabric bits in it. So this is that.
I have an almost complete run of that magazine.
Cool.
From 1946 to at least at this point into the mid 70s. From 46 to the 70s. It's like the one thing I decided I will collect all of these because I use them. I use them almost every day in my research. They're phenomenal.
So, cool. So I just recently, when I reread the books that are written about Ebba, it's a Swedish fashion journalist called Lotta Levenhaupt who has written 2 books about her. And from her diary in the book, you can read that Ebba also bought a similar, like a color book, a sample book in the US very early on with wonderful little plastic leaves in all the colors you can possibly imagine.
Cute.
Throughout her career. So I like to think of that too, that she, like those American colors were always with her, even though she did say that she was very inspired by the nature around her homestead. I really think that so much of that like light and the like innovation in new materials stuck on her, even though she was a bit more traditional and she didn't like necessarily experiment that much in her own textiles. But I really feel like, in my own little theory, I think that when she went to the US, she kind of like could let go a little bit of her persona that she was here, because then, you know, she had her kind of title and background and family to keep up, like that image of that. But when she went to the US, she befriended lots of people, and she befriended the Wrigley family, the big chewing gum family. They were obviously also very rich. But she went to their ranch in Arizona, and she told me about how they, you know, she got on the boots and the hat and the denim, and she rode out in the desert. And like, I could see how her eyes were like still kind of sparkly when she told me about this. She was 94, I think, when I met her, but she remembered everything like it was yesterday. I really like, I surely regret that I didn't ask her more about it, but like when she told me, I was just sitting there and like, you know, just soaking it all in. And I think somehow these things still, like, I think she brought them home, but I really think that the experience for her to be in the US was like a big portion of it was her own freedom, really. And I don't know if she ever met Dorothy or Claire. Like, she must have seen their design. It's impossible.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Especially since Libas had already been established since the 30s. There's no way that she couldn't have known her. Now, I have kind of combed as much as I can reasonably through all of the records that have been digitized by the Smithsonian for the Dorothy Libas papers. And I scanned correspondence for any signs of Ebba, and I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything that links their names in the press. So I think they were really, you could look at their things and say, oh, they're so similar, but they were really very, very different in many ways in terms of what their broader goals were. Yeah. I think it's really amazing that Ebba kind of took it upon herself to create economic opportunities for her community. And that's something that Libas was taking that into the broader community of the United States and the world. Yeah. But I think that they did like community and to be able to give to their community. And in Dorothy's life, her community was global, but her immediate community was her studio and the weavers. And she had people like Ebba that stayed with her for, you know, decades or their whole career. And she was also a really good mentor to other designers, and had some very influential friends and friendships. I mean, everybody knows that she was friends with Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah. I know
and
that
that,
to parties with him. She told me.
right.
Like,
So they were certainly in the same circles. I know that to be true.
Yeah.
And Libes also was very close with some Scandinavians as well. So I'm sure that they must have known about each other. But Libes was also somebody who never stopped moving and never slept. I kind of call her a shark. Like, she just had to keep moving or die. And she did. She just was always constantly busy. And so I'm sure that they were in the same place at the same time at some point, but I couldn't find any evidence in the files. So
I guess we'll never know for sure.
No.
Being in America, I think too must have felt, you were mentioning how that kind of gave her like a sense of freedom. And I think especially as you go west, in that like Southwest in California, I mean, there certainly was, we're going to look at a couple of things here. There certainly was that sort of like westward, you know, kind of experience that was going on as a trend in the 1940s, just with American designs in particular. So this one right here is on the right is a Claire McCardle design.
Oh, wow.
And so she was really into, you know, pants, but with color. So like this caption is so funny. In pink jeans. I mean, you'd never know that this is pink.
Right.
In sturdy upholsterer's cotton. So like, you know, bringing in some different textiles and sort of like romanticizing this kind of like westward movement and sense of freedom. I think that in California, you know, I was finding she did a lot of these like kind of dirndl skirts, these like gathered style skirts. And that was something, you know, that Claire started to try to bring in when she started working on separates in the 1940s. But, you know, California designers were doing this as well. I think I see a lot of parallels between Luella Ballerino, who was working in the 1940s, 50s in California. I feel like there's so much interesting stuff to say about the California color palette and how, you know, New York was a little bit more subdued and California really took their inspiration in terms of color and textiles a lot more from the natural landscape. And there is definitely a sense of freedom with these California clothes that are like, you know, they have more of a casualness to them that was reflected not only in the fabrics, but the sort of designs. They borrowed a lot from like European and South American traditional clothing. And, you know, the designers in New York were doing that as well. But it feels like the California sort of aesthetic already was like geared toward freedom and being in tune with, I mean, this is just like this California Authentics handprints was used by a lot of different California designers. And it just like embodying that spirit of like this like vast, beautiful landscape and borrowing these kinds of desert colors for it and borrowing these sort of traditional designs for it. But yeah, I saw a lot of parallels in the work of Ballerino, especially, and Ebba.
I can see that definitely.
Yeah, me too. Some gorgeous pictures.
Yeah, and I think I mean, Libes was also very in tune with her surroundings, and so she was also drawing a lot of her inspiration from nature as well. I remember one of my favorite quotes about her and Lurex is she said, or actually talking about shine and glitter, and she says, glitter is what sunshine does to blades of grass.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that will never leave me, that explanation, and I see it in California a lot. Like there's a beautiful time of day when the light hits the palm trees. I know it sounds very like romantic, but it's so true. The light, you know what I'm talking about, Jessica. The light hits the palm trees, and as the fronds are swaying, it's like literally like lurex is hanging from the trees. So I feel like she was very attuned to those things. But another thing that was really interesting, when she actually was friends with Luella Ballerino, and worked with her while Ballerino was a designer at Janssen. So Liebes also worked for Janssen, which was an Oregon mill. But in her in her work with Ballerino and others, she kind of was able to profess some of her own feelings about dressing. And she really felt like, for example, when women were choosing bathing suits, she advised, don't choose colors based on your surroundings. Like if you're going, to the Mediterranean, don't buy a blue bathing suit because you think it matches the setting. She was like, buy things that look good on your skin. The colors should relate to you if you're wearing them. So she was able to kind of offer some of her wardrobe advice here and there, and it was very practical about how women can choreograph their closets and mix and match. Like she knew that she should make t-shirts and shorts, or play shorts and separates in complementary colors, in matching colors, so that women could mix and match what they wanted to do. And it's like, that's a concept we take so for granted now, but it was kind of a exciting new thing in the 40s, especially to think this way, this modular building blocks kind of way. And definitely McArdle was ahead of the pack on that.
Yeah, for sure. This is a sweater from the early 1940s that was part of her separates line, which at that point were mostly geared toward college girls, but just this, like, again, these buttons that you can do yourself on the side to connect them. But yeah, a lot of this sort of like, and she was working in more neutral tones. So like there's a lot of brown, there's a lot of black, but yeah, being able to promote separates was a really new thing in the early 40s.
Yeah. I would also just like to to that quote where you were just saying about the palm trees and the glitter, because one of Ebba's best quotes, I think, is that she said that she was mostly feeling inspired during the winter, because that's when she felt she had the most hunger for color. And that's totally something that I can relate to as a Swede myself, and like the long and dark. And I like look at my pictures from whenever I've been to LA or Arizona, or in that specific blue sky and the light. So it is really special, but it's also very special in Sweden during the summer. And that's
is often
live on. Yeah.
It's often a lot easier to design when you are picturing yourself somewhere else, or you're picturing somebody else's lifestyle. It's a lot easier. For me, I don't like to design thinking of just myself and mine. I like to be somewhere else, or thinking of a different type of person to design for. So it's very, like, I totally understand why she would have fallen in. Whereas for me, I might have actually fallen in love with the opposite. Your nature and your weather and your, lifestyle over there. So
I guess
it's I think one more thing that I think that the California connection is so important, because it is sort of the birth of the casual cool lifestyle, just the casual lifestyle, I should say. Not and I don't mean sloppy or sweatpants. I just mean clothes designed for everyday life, not just clothes designed for going to meet somebody for lunch, or going to a cocktail party. It was just like, this is what you're going to wear today. And I think a lot of that really comes from California, and I think the world owes us, because basically that's the lifestyle now, for better or worse, I guess. But it didn't mean that you couldn't look good. It just meant that you had clothes that you could move in and they could go from a range of situations, not specific, not situation specific.
Yeah. I don't know. I have just one more quick thing I wanted to share with Cashin. I know that Bonnie Cashin and
oh God, you beat me to it.
Okay, great. I just wanted
perfect. This is a perfect segue because I was
perfect. Yeah, especially talking about at-home clothes. I don't know if we can see my screen at this point. Can we see it? No.
Hopefully very soon.
Okay. There we go. So this is such a wonderful example of the lurex weaving, you know, and the at-home clothes. I mean, they're so indoor tweeds. I love that. You know, this sort of like, so this is a Libas fabric weaving, and yeah, just this feeling of like a plain cashmere top with these, you know, beautiful fabrics, and being able to be very, you know, chic at home. The intricacy of the design and the fabric meant that, you know, you might wear an apron, but it's going to be very chic. And the colors and patterns mean that like, it's not the end of the world if you spill a drink, you know, or something. I love these sorts of like big, you know, blanket skirts that could be worn at home, that were just this like, how beautiful, entertaining at home in these skirts.
I really want to show a picture of Ebba here in this long skirt that I might ask for our moderators' help to choose. Yeah, here we go. There it is. Great. Because it's also one of Ebba's big successes, the hostess skirt, or the barbecue hostess skirt. That I've like tried to figure out the story of this, because sometimes when you read about it, it's like she saw it in America and she brought it to Sweden, or she made it in Sweden and she brought it to America. I don't really think it's that way around. I think it's the other way around. But it was definitely one of her big hits, and like having this sort of casual, elegant style was definitely new in Sweden. And I would like to credit Ebba for taking that to Sweden, because she really took a bold move doing so. Because I think like America in Sweden, I mean, we're very influenced by American culture, and we've been for so long, and ever since like people started moving to the US in the late 1800s and moving forward. My own grandmother had an aunt in the US, and ever like when I was a kid, she would talk about it, and she was like, every Christmas we got those packages with like those hideous ties from the States, and they were so colorful and bright. And it was just like, every time she told me, I was like, they were probably the most beautiful 40s hand-painted silk ties that I would have loved, but you know, they were like made into rag rugs 50 years ago. So I think Ebba was definitely quite brave in trying to bring this to Sweden. I think it was hard to make it stick in a way, because it was something new, definitely. But some people definitely dared to try it on. But I think she had more success with this skirt in particular in the US.
Yeah. I'll show you. I have my Bonnie Cashin photos too. So let me show you mine.
Let's see if I can. Okay, good.
Let's see.
And I should also mention that we're going to start to try and wrap this up in
a
few minutes. Just like we said, an hour. I could definitely go on and talk about this forever, and there's no stress. But if there are any people out listening who would like to write a question, please do so in the comment section, and we will try to reply to them.
Yeah. So here are my Skirtings ink photos. The Vogue one on the left, the one on the right was taken at the Brussels Exposition in 1958. They're both Bonnie Cashin skirts, and they're all, not all of the entire collection was made out of Libas's fabrics, but most of them were, and they were marketed as collector's items. So there is something like heirloom quality about the hand woven fabric.
Yeah.
And there is also something about, I mean, it was definitely designed in exactly the same spirit, which is it's your casual elegance. You can be a hostess. You can go over to the stove and get your, you know, whatever you need to get out of the oven, and then you can take it out to the table where your guests are, and you look just as great as if you hadn't dressed for actually entertaining. And I know that that Ebba said that the barbecue and the casual culture is what sort of cemented her fame in the United States with this exact type of skirt. And so I just thought it's a very interesting parallel that there was this sort of the hostess fashion was very important. And I think the parallels are so wonderful here that I had to put that together. I have, I think, only one more slide here. And I just wanted to show this really quickly because I feel like one of the reasons I get asked a lot about, like, why don't people know Dorothy Liebes better? And I think it's not fully, but it's very much in large part to how depictions were done in the press. And you have to think that most of this was black and white.
Yeah.
Almost, unless it was in a Architectural Digest or House and Garden or Vogue, you were not seeing a lot of these images of these women in their colorful things in color. And I think that limits your popularity, even if your talent precedes you. And I mean, it's also fashion, you know, people go in and out of fashion. It's also who's telling the stories, you know, who's digging to tell those stories. So if Ebba's not well known here, she's getting more well known because people like you are digging to tell the story. And she's there. She's always been there. It's just it takes the right people to tell the stories for people to start hearing them again.
Yeah.
There we go. That's it.
Totally.
Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
on that point, really quickly, I just want to highlight this book from Elizabeth Stevenson. It comes out in June, so pre-order it. It's a beautiful, wonderful read, and it just like gives so much insight into the historical kind of context about in which Claire lived, and some, you know, how she worked and what it was like on 7th Avenue in the 40s and 50s. So definitely go and pre-order that.
Read that.
And the Empresses of 7th Avenue is also a really good recent book that gives you a really good landscape of the whole fashion industry in New York. In that period.
Also, I really recommend the book that you made for the exhibition about Dorothy Liebes last year, I think. The Smithsonian, A Dark, a Bright, a Light. Beautiful, beautiful book with lots of big, good images of her work that I really like, as I can use it in my studio. I'm also going to show these 2 books that are published about Ebba. This is the older one. This is a newer one. I think there's an English recap at the end of this one, but they both should be, because they're both really good. And it looks like we potentially have maybe a question.
See there.
Yeah, we have a question. Were these clothes meant to wear with girdles or traditional old school forming undergarments from the time? This is a really good question.
It is definitely, for McCardle, it's a definite no.
No.
She was very, you know, anti corsets, anti girdles, anti shoulder pads, you know, just the sloping natural shoulders. She talked a lot about the natural body. Now, that's not to say that, like, you know, we were necessarily like fat positive in the 1950s, but there was a real emphasis on, you know, sportsmanship and athleticism and like outdoor activities. And it was definitely, her clothing was meant to be draped on the natural body and not be hampered by, you know, corsets or anything, which is, you know, when Dior came along, it was just like horrifying for her.
I think that she liked to give you the option to choose the definition that you wanted on your body, with the belting or the straps or the ties, or if you wanted something tuckered up, you know, pulled up at the neck or not. She let you choose. Whereas if you were going to wear a Dior dress at the time, you likely needed a whole understructure to be able to make that look actually work on your body, because most bodies don't actually look like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And you're also, Lisa, I think you're one of your big one of the things you really master is to construct clothing for any body type. And I think that's definitely something that's worth mentioning in fashion today. That's definitely something that's been like forgotten, or just it's been,
it's hard to do. It's a different level of thinking about design, and that's something that these women thought about back then. When you're thinking about practical and functional design, if you're going to design a top, you can't just design a top for a certain type of figure.
Yeah.
Whereas, it's easy to make your clothes look good on the same kind of body. But, even if you look at the people who are in your family or your friend circle, every single body is completely different. So to be able to make a garment work through a vast array of shapes, you kind of have to you have to put a lot of thought into what that design is, and then let that design become what it becomes when it goes on these different types of bodies. And you can't do that if you're trying to keep it, perfectly structured. And I think that that's really inspiring about what McCardle did. Also, again, with what the fabrics allow you to do.
Oh yeah.
One woman wrote to McCardle and said she wore her dress through her pregnancy and beyond. So
right.
Yeah.
And one more thing I realized about the skirts, the skirting inks with Bonnie Cashin, is that Bonnie had a real respect for fabric. And I think that seems to be like a common thread, that there's a real paying of mind to what the fabric will do, what it should do, and then also how to maximize the fabric. So, for example, some of those skirting ink skirts, they have only a tiny dart, 2 darts like at the waist, and a sewn in Petersham band, but the rest is just a width of textile. No cutting, no piecing. And that's another thing. I feel like the cutting and the piecing of Western tailoring really screwed up our relationship with cloth as it is. And so, Bonnie would just take whatever came off of the loom and would try to make it then fit, rather than cutting up a piece that just came off the loom and putting it back together. So that's another thing that I don't know how many people in this day and age actually have that kind of relationship with cloth and their clothing. So yeah,
they should get back to it. I know also like the Ripsa skirt or Ebba skirts were, from the beginning at least, they had this stretchy waistband, like a black velvet stretchy waistband. And it's really, I think it looks really good. And it's also like telling of the time that like finding a stretchy velvet ribbon waistband today, I don't know even where I could buy that. I would love to have it. But I think that's also like what we've been talking about, the mills in the US, and how it was easier then to access all these beautiful fabrics, to also incorporate all of those like different components of like the design, the fabric, the details, the construction, the tailoring. Everything came together to possibly create this kind of revolutionary design that we all still wear in different ways today. I don't think we have any more questions right now. There's still like, we're going to give, if there's anyone sitting there having a question in their head, please write it now and you can still squeeze that in. And also, I'm wondering if I should do the recap in Swedish. To be honest, I'm not sure if I can, because there's so much information. If anyone would like a recap in Swedish, please write that in the comment section and I will do that. But otherwise, I would just like to send a big thank you for participating in this seminar. I could definitely go on and talk about this for hours more. It's so interesting, and I love to hear everything that you've been saying, and would be so cool if we mentioned it before the seminar began, that the current exhibition at Sörmlands Museum about Ebba should travel to the US, and I'm just gonna send that out to the atmosphere that should happen. That would be great. It would be so cool. I would love it if we could have some kind of future collaboration in also Dorothy Liebe's work and Claire Mercado's work. There was one Claire Mercado, Liebe's work and an exhibition here a year ago, which was like a group exhibition of Scandinavian design in the US. So that's the first time I saw one piece live.
Oh, you saw the De Beckman Dazzle. Yes, I saw it here in Los Angeles. That show was wonderful. And that's a really special piece. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool to see it. We don't seem to have any more questions, just really nice comments here about people who, that's so nice to hear. It was really cool to have you listening and to have you join me. I think we forgot to say where you are. Are you all in Los Angeles or at different places?
Are we all in Los Angeles?
Yep, I think so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now we need to get together in real life.
I need to come to Los Angeles soon.
Yes.
Yes.
And then continue the conversation with us, and then you can teach us some weaving.
Yeah.
I would love to. Keep that up for sure. But I guess we should. Yeah, I have to finish this now.
Thank you so much, Miriam. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining, Lisa, Lee, and Jessica. And also, I would like to say a big thank you to Sörmlands Museum for arranging this and also bringing out the exhibition of Ebba, because I do believe that her work deserves more attention, as do Liebe's and Ricardo's. And also go search for Lisa's work.
Oh,
available. You really should look it out. And you can also find all of you on Instagram and different websites. I think if you look into my Instagram, which is Miriam Parkman, you can see links to all of you. And otherwise, your Instagram, Jessica, is No Accounting for Taste. Lee is Pattern Play, right?
Say.
Lisa is Revel Clothing, right, on Instagram.
Revel Collection.
Revel Collection. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and see you soon, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.